Hello, Jen here from Lunar Spirit Wellbeing, and I'm joined with the lovely Andrea today, all the way from Australia. Hi, Andrea.
Hey Jen, how are you?
Very well, thank you. You?
Yes, very well, thank you.
And thank you so much for coming along and sharing your journey and your experiences with mental health. Over to you. I'm going to let you share your story.
Okay, so I guess my story starts quite a few years ago. So by the time I was 27, I'd encountered a couple of traumas in quick succession. So I'd probably always been a relatively cup half empty girl. I can be honest about that. But when my first son was born when I was 25, he was diagnosed with cancer at 2 days old, went through treatment and went into remission when he was 10 months old. And I had an amazing husband that was a cup half full guy, so that was always a good balance. But we had another son at the start of 2006, and then in September of 2006, when he was 8 months old, my husband was actually killed in a car accident. So within 3 years, and by 27, I'd kind of had to face the real possibility of the mortality of my child, and then got through that, and obviously had to bury my husband. So
Wow,
those,
that's a lot of
yeah,
trauma in a short space of time.
yeah. And I guess I had no prior experience, and I'm not sure if that actually makes it any easier, but like I had all four grandparents come to my husband's funeral. So I seriously, he was the first real traumatic thing that I had to go through other than my son. So I did what most people do and get on with it the best way that you can. And distraction was probably my greatest tool. So just got busy, just did things, just one foot in front of the other. And it was probably 2 years afterwards, we were farmers, and I knew that it was probably not something that I could continue to sustain, as in I was on my in-laws' farm and they were amazingly supportive people, but I could already feel the pull of life taking me somewhere different. So I had gone to uni, I was a hairdresser, and then decided to go to university to support my children and became a primary school teacher. So I could already feel that pull over in a different direction. But the level of guilt that I felt for that was really quite suffocating. And by 2 years afterwards, that push pull had probably led me into my depression, just feeling quite trapped, not by anyone, but just by the circumstances. And I knew that I needed to get help when I was sort of looking at the trees outside, thinking in the car, thinking, I can't live this life. I don't necessarily feel like I was suicidal as much as as much as you say I was looking at trees in my car and thinking, how do I make it look like an accident? I think it's that element of, I didn't want to die, I just didn't want to be living this life. I didn't know how to get out of the pain other than get out of the life. And
Mhm.
I knew I couldn't take my children with me, because how would that impact all of the people that were left behind? And I couldn't leave them with no parents. So I decided that I should go to the doctor, because it was probably getting to a point where I didn't think that I was managing it myself, and I didn't want it to get any worse. So I did go to the doctor, and I ended up on antidepressants, and they were absolutely my saving grace. So I was quite a judgmental person prior to my own experiences. Naivety can lead you to being quite judgmental, I guess. So I probably fought off going on medication because of the stigma I had attached to it. So therefore I felt my own judgment coming back to bite me on the ass, I guess. But it was definitely my saving grace, because it allowed me to just really settle my thoughts. It was just the overwhelm of that constant chatter in my head all the time, that constant questioning, that constant barrage of, you're selfish, you're terrible, you're horrible. And it just allowed that to just really settle. And I was able to make really clear, conscious decisions and be okay with them. And so I started to then go towards the life that I felt like I was probably being drawn to. So I moved into town, obviously going to university. I set a few other things up for mine and my children's future. and things started to really just get back on track, I guess. Like, I don't think you never recover from those experiences, but I was able to manage them, and I was able to come to a level of acceptance that I could move forward and not stay in that really overwhelming space. And as it would happen, I ended up a couple of years later meeting a really beautiful man. I came off medication after 12 months, actually. I started to feel a little dizzy. So the medication was fantastic, but then I started to feel a little dizzy, and I just felt like the medication wasn't right for me anymore. And that was just a personal thing. I wasn't guided to be no doctor said you should come off it, but I slowly weaned myself off it, which I'm not sure whether that's the right or wrong thing, but it felt right for me. And I was fine. Everything was totally fine. Met my second husband. Everything was amazing. We ended up getting married, and I'd started meditation and things by then. They were the things that now took over from the medication, because I didn't have any of those things. I wasn't aware of those things. I'd never practiced those things before. So I actually started, the first thing I did was actually start reading self-development books, actually. That was my very first port of call.
Who did you read out of interest?
The very first book I ever read was, so it was Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. That was the very first book I ever read. And it was just, because it really spoke to me in being able to say no. I really did struggle with that. Like, I was a people pleaser, and the guilt just, it's like it was rotting my soul. And I didn't know how to not hate myself for needing to do what I needed to do. And so so there were a few other practices that I included into my life, and we fell pregnant and having a baby girl, and everything, like, it was just the most blissed out I had ever been. Like, my husband is absolutely amazing. He was the best stepdad, and is the best stepdad to our two sons. We built a house together. Like, my life was just, I felt happy again, and I never thought that I ever would. And it was just such a nice place to be. And so I did hypnobirthing and planned a home birth, and wasn't going to have any drugs or any intervention, and everything was just going to be this sweet little, happy experience. And I ended up having to go to the hospital, which was quite fine. But within 2 days of coming home, I was like at rock bottom, and it really did take the wind out of my sails, because I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it. So
out of nowhere then.
Absolutely. Like, just like a Mack truck. It was just because I was so good leading into it. And I felt, I actually uttered the words. Because I went on a silent retreat. I went on a 7-day silent retreat, like, before I fell pregnant. And I actually uttered the words after the retreat: I will never suffer mental health again, because I didn't have these tools back when I ended up with depression. It's because I didn't have the resources. That's why it happened. So it felt like a fall from grace. It was harder to deal with that than ending up with depression and wanting to run into a tree after my husband, because that made sense to me.
Yeah.
Losing a husband and the trauma and the grief and the pain, that's okay that led to depression. That makes sense that led to depression. How can I be so happy and so settled and so healed, and I'm here again? And the post-traumatic disorder, the post-traumatic stress, because every time my baby cried, it was a trigger. And so I would go back to, my 8-month-old son was very unsettled prior to his dad dying, but then obviously with everything that went on, I would just walk the hallway night after night after night. So that's where I went back to. That's what it did. So that was actually worse than the depression for me personally. And I didn't understand it, because I was in such a good place. I just, obviously not having any experience with post-traumatic, you don't realize that it can happen like that, and that I didn't know that was my trigger. So it's kind of like the trigger's there before you realize that that's what it does. And so I spent about 7 weeks literally having no sleep whatsoever. I had a baby that slept 8 hours a night from the time she was 6 days old, and I
Wow.
didn't sleep a wink of it.
Oh no.
Because I released adrenaline straight up, and it was always watching the clock. I need to go to sleep. I need to go to sleep. I need to go to sleep. Oh my gosh, I can't. And it was just that cycle night after night. So I ended up again back at the doctor after 7 weeks and back on medication. This time I only stayed on it for 3 months before I started to feel like I was in a better place.
Yeah.
And again, I weaned myself off it. And my daughter is now just over 8 years old, and I haven't been back on medication.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, it was just putting one foot in front of the other. We set about some goals and dreams. We travelled Australia. So if anyone knows Australia, so we travelled for 8 months in a caravan with our 3 children, and then relocated from sort of southern Australia to northern Australia, where it's beautiful and warm and the beaches are amazing. We had no jobs, no house, no idea where we were going. This was last year, start of 2019.
Wow.
Total blind faith that we would work it out and it would be okay. And that's on the back of someone that literally couldn't control their emotions around sleep. Like my life is totally different now. And I'm probably at a stage where I'm really grateful in some ways for those experiences of mental health, because they really helped teach me who I am and who I'm not. And I don't think I ever would have got that insight without it. Like, it really did teach me how to love myself and all of myself, because I got so sick of hating myself and so sick of feeling so down on myself for not being able to have things together. I had to learn, you know, how to love myself with grace and the acceptance of this is who I am, and this is a part of my journey, and it doesn't make me broken. It just is, this is just one of the pieces of my puzzle. Yeah.
Wow, what an inspiring story. You've been through so much. But I love the fact that you just had blind faith and just up sticks and travelled around Australia in the caravan.
Yeah.
Sounds like absolute bliss to me.
Yeah, it was look, we had a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we were all crammed in a caravan, so it certainly had its moments. But it's just it was one of those, I guess it was one of those markers in my journey of, this is how far I've come, that I can literally let go enough to be able to trust that we'll be okay, and probably moving more so because we'd saved and had savings to live off on our trip. But we pretty much didn't have that when we relocated. Like, we were sort of, and jobs where we came to, like, we didn't, because we didn't do any research, like, we didn't find out until we got here. Jobs aren't that easy to come by, and houses and pricing is much more expensive than where we came from. But we just trusted that we'd work it out. And if this is, I'm a universe girl, so, you know, everybody has their own belief systems, and that's fine. But if this is where we were meant to be, the universe would help us work it out. And I literally we're renting at the moment 3 blocks from the beach. I ride my push bike to the beach. I walk along the beach for an hour. And I don't know about your beaches over there, but our beaches are beautiful sand, not rocks, or like, they're just...
We have a mixture. Yeah, but they're
Depends
not.
where you are.
Yeah, Cornwall's really nice, down like the south coast. That's, yeah, well, it's called, yeah, southwest coast
Yeah, okay.
of England. Yeah, Cornwall and Devon have got amazing sandy beaches. But yeah, nowhere near where I am. No, it takes about 5 hours drive to get there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, and that was the same for us where we came from. You know, we were closer to rivers than we were oceans, whereas, like, right now, if I took my headphones out, I can hear the beach. So, and it's just, I think the depth of, and I've always reflected a lot on this in terms of the journey, is that as much as, yes, I've been through some pretty horrendous things that I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy, I also wouldn't have the depth of gratitude and the depth of just pure thankfulness for where I am today it's kind of like the, you know, the dark and the light. You know, the light is so much brighter because the dark was so dark. And,
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, if somebody said you can go back and relive your life, I would obviously change it. I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't have my husband die. I wish he was here to live out his life and see our sons grow up. And that's, it's something that I don't know I'll ever make peace with. But would I choose to go through life without any hardship? I think I would have to say no, because what I've created and who I've become because of it is what I choose to reflect on, more so than, you know, the hardness of those experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you've brought that up, that even though we go through these hard times and, you know, awful situations that we wouldn't want to relive, we wouldn't want to wish them on anybody, but they do make us who we are, and they do mold us, and they are lessons, they are opportunities of growth as well. And the darkness and the light, the duality of that, and embracing the darkness inside us, it only makes the light shine brighter. I'm a firm believer of that. And all the things that I've been through, I wouldn't go back and change it. You know, I wish I could unsee a few things, but I wouldn't change where I've come from and who I am, because that all those experiences have got me to where I am today. And
Yeah.
you know, I'm happy, I love life, and I'm grateful for every single moment of that. So what steps do you take now then so what process do you go through to keep your mental health on a level?
On
And
a level,
did you deal with all the triggers? Did you get therapy for the triggers, or did you do this holistically, or what did you do?
no, mainly. So other than the medication, like 2 times that I went on to medication, basically everything else. So I saw a counsellor straight after my husband's accident, but that's the only sort of professional other than the doctors. Then it was, I had probably some of my biggest ahas and dealing with triggers around guilt and shame, and being able to step forward and move away and things like that. That was through life coaching.
Yeah.
That was through an amazing woman who helped me, and hypnosis. So she had hypnosis in her toolkit as well. I stumbled onto doTERRA actually, which is actually what led me to quite a lot of the people that I have done sort of different sessions with. And I absolutely believe that doTERRA, that the oils and who they brought into my life because of it, is why I'm here today. Also, like, I'm a transformational courage coach and I do inspirational speaking, and I absolutely think it's because of the oils, because of that helped me shift through some of those doubts and fears, led me to my beautiful life coach. And so it was, yeah, that sort of stuff. So I'm on a daily basis, and you know, it's being human too. So sometimes I'll forget to stay in my routine, and then I'll feel like, oh gosh, I feel a bit crappy, and recognize, hang on a minute, you need to go back, and you need to be, it's about being intentional, and it's about being intentional about who we are and how we want to support ourselves. And that was the biggest thing for me when I came off my medication. That wasn't flippant. That wasn't, oh, I don't need that anymore, I'm fine. It was a very intentional tuning in and going, the first time it was, these make me feel dizzy. I think my brain has actually settled enough and it's telling me I don't actually need this anymore. That's what it felt like. And the second time was very similar, that I felt very intentional about where my mindset had gone, because I was really strung out about the sleep and having my baby sleep, getting her to sleep and getting her into routine, and so controlling, because that's what keeps us safe. But my parents took us to America, like my sister and my family and everything, when she was 3 months old. And so I didn't need a routine. She had to sleep when she had to sleep, and she had to sleep wherever. And that in itself actually broke that control, because I realized that the sun still came up even though I didn't have her in some set silly routine. And so it was after that I realized maybe I don't need the medication. Maybe it is more of a mindset shift now that I can manage. So the oils, I absolutely love. So my routine at the moment is I obviously head down to the beach because it's only 3 blocks away, and I walk for an hour. and I will do different things. So I've been doing Wim Hof breathing. So
Oh, I
that,
love Wim Hof.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
That stuff is like that exhalation, and like it's just phenomenal. So
It
something
literally
like
does
that.
get you high on your own supply, doesn't it? I find that in the oils, because we've just discovered, literally at the beginning of this call, because my door went, with my doTERRA delivery, that we both do doTERRA, and and they have been,
Same item.
the oils and the supplements have been a massive part of my healing journey. So I've been on them a year now, and they've just changed my physical health no end,
Yeah,
and
and
help
the
with my
oil,
emotions as well.
yeah, that sensory journey, like definitely the oils in terms of that connection between the, you know, our sense of smell and directly connected to our emotional receptors in our brain. It's just, it's amazing how when you're intentional about it, and that's what I do. I will be intuitively guided, find out what the oils are meant for, become very intentional, apply them, and set up my day in that way. I use the Wim Hof breathing. I absolutely love EFT, so emotional freedom technique, every day.
Yeah.
I love it. It's amazing. Um, and just probably the biggest thing, and we had a quick chat about this before we jumped on as well, was the biggest thing I feel in my journey with all of those tools and everything like that was learning to accept my shadows. That this journey was not about just becoming better at things and being a better person and a kinder person and a more this and a more that and helping others. Like, all of that's really important, and we all have great values, but the freedom came from accepting that I can be judgmental, that I can be sarcastic, that I can be short-tempered, that I can be all of those things that we try to hide and pretend. I can be sensitive, I can be defensive, and we try to pretend like that's not a part of who we are, because for some reason we have shame associated to our imperfections.
Yeah.
And it was recognizing, because if I'm willing to accept all of these aspects of who I am and embrace them and improve what I can improve and accept what I can't, then there's really no space for either people or situations that don't align with that. And so it creates this, if I can love me more and my imperfections, then I have more love to give others and their imperfections for a start. So it bridges that gap with relationship dysfunction and things like that. So it's all entwined for me. But
I absolutely love that. And you're right. And it is about setting your intention. So I set my intention for the day. In the morning, I use mantras, meditation, and I set my intention. I know, I decide, I choose how my day is going to be. And I choose, and I choose again, and I choose again. And if I find myself going off on one feeling, these feelings of anger, I just accept them, acknowledge them, and then I choose again, come back to a place of love and set my intention to be of use, of service to people for the highest good and compassion.
yeah, absolutely.
About my day, I serve through love, but we do have to honor those shadows. We do. And do you like Brene Brown says, you know, the
I
book.
love Brene.
I love her. She's amazing. The gifts of imperfection, because they are our gifts, aren't they? Our
Yeah,
imperfections are our gifts. And yeah,
absolutely.
I do. Do you
And the
read?
other reason I love her is because she absolutely shines a light on vulnerability. And I
Yeah.
don't think we've nailed being vulnerable. For a lot of people, it's really challenging to be vulnerable because we feel like that is a weakness, and yet that's our absolute strength.
It is vulnerability. Did you know, as soon as I learned to be vulnerable, allowed myself to be vulnerable, that changed my world. Owning my vulnerability, owning my story, and just owning that where I've come from, and learning to speak about it was one of my greatest strengths, I think.
Yeah.
But it's uncomfortable at first.
And I
And
think for me, it's that we have to, yeah, there is an element of having to strengthen. Like for me, when I reflect on it, I had to strengthen my self-belief first. I had to begin to accept my shadows and my gifts first to have that foundation, because when you're vulnerable, then you are opening up to how other people view that and things like that. So it's being okay in your own skin, that it really doesn't matter if you are vulnerable, what comes from that.
Yes.
Because I think
Yeah.
I think the fear behind vulnerability is the fear of judgment, and how is that going to be perceived, and what will people think of that. But
Yeah.
when you are okay, then the external really doesn't impact as greatly, does it? So
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and that's part of what I teach in coaching is building resilience as well.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
complete, and at least you need to love yourself fiercely and not be affected by other people's opinions or judgments. Because in the end, that's just a reflection of them, and not
yeah.
really down to what's going on in you. When you own yourself and you know your truths and you're true to yourself, then the opinions of others, become irrelevant, I find.
Yeah. The other thing that I've just started doing too, I don't know whether you've ever done it, and I'll probably say it incorrectly, but Hopiano.
Oh yeah, I have heard of that. I've not done that, and it keeps popping up on my timeline. So maybe that's a sign that I should really. And you've just said it, so maybe that's something that I'd explore.
Yeah, I'd heard about it, and I've seen the word and all of those things, but I've never really explored it. And I don't know, I just felt called to do it on the beach yesterday morning, and it was,
So what
I
is
don't
it
even know
then?
what.
So what's it
It's
involved?
literally 4 sentences, and it is,
Okay.
um, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's the intention. So I went into it basically wanting that for myself, as in I wanted to forgive myself for the pressure that I put on myself, or those aspects that I haven't improved on yet, and all of that, just self-belief of being able to willingly forgive yourself for the things that maybe
Yeah.
you're not getting right, or aren't as good as you think they should be. And it was actually quite profound, because a lot of other things came through that I wasn't expecting. So it's that energy exchange from if there has been situations in your life, or it can be done for self as well, but it's all about forgiveness. And I didn't actually think I had a great deal of work to do on forgiveness, but clearly the energy shift told me
Oh,
something different. So
yeah. I do a lot of forgiveness in my full moon rituals. So each month I hold space for women mostly, but men are welcome. Um, so we do our full moon forgiveness and releasing ceremony. Yeah, and
might be
I
give it a whirl and see if it does anything different for, like, yeah. It was because I looked at it when it's 4 sentences. What's that going to do? Like, really, what's it going to do? But it was really quite powerful. So yeah, it's
forgiveness is a
Hawaiian.
powerful thing. Yeah, yeah,
Mm, yeah,
yeah.
so.
Keep seeing it popping up. I'll have to look into it a bit more. But no, thanks for that
No,
tip.
no problem, no problem. My
So,
pleasure.
what advice then would you give to somebody who is suffering from similar conditions, suffering from mental health, or has an early diagnosis? What is at the beginning of their journey? What advice would you give?
So my first piece of advice, which I think is crucial, but can be quite difficult when you're in that place, is to really acknowledge that you need help. That
Hmm.
it's that stigma of mental health that I really want to break down. That this is nobody's fault. You haven't failed at anything. This is just where you are for now. My favorite saying that I use in coaching is that everything is nothing until you apply a meaning.
Hmm.
So struggling or having mental health or whatever is actually nothing. It's
Hmm.
nothing until we apply our meaning to it. And whether
Yeah.
we apply the meaning of we've failed, or we're useless, or I should be doing better than this, that gets in the way. It's being able to just know that right now you need some added tools, and these are the tools that you have at your disposal. You have doctors, you have medication, you have therapists, you have psychologists, you have coaches, you have holistic. We're so fortunate that we have choices, and I guess that's the second thing, is that there are choices. And even though it can be really overwhelming when you're in that place and you haven't got the support yet, it's still a choice of whether you're going to step towards finding the right tool for you or stay where you are. And so it's that acceptance of being where you are, and then it doesn't actually mean anything, but then knowing that you've got the choices and making the right choices for you. And that can be challenging when life feels overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
But that choice needs to be made, because we only get one crack at this. We really only get one crack at it.
Yep, exactly.
So, and that there's no shame. Everybody's journey is different. So some people, holistic will be more than enough. They will find exactly the right holistic practice, and that'll be enough to support them for the end of their days. Some people will need medication for the end of their days. Some people will need a combination. It doesn't actually matter. What matters is that you can live your life from a place of actually feeling like it's worth living. That's the place we need to get to, regardless of what we use.
Absolutely.
That's the best advice I've got.
And that's some really good advice. That is good advice. It's finding what works, isn't it? Because we're all individual, aren't we? And what works for one necessarily wouldn't work for another. So yeah, and we are fortunate, like you say, we've got so many options now. You just don't have to go down the whole medical route. You can do a bit of both. You can do private coaching, you can do holistics, you can do pretty much, there's so many different ways and so many tools available to help with mental health, and so many different groups, organisations that will help as well.
Yeah, and it's that, for me, learning to trust ourselves. Like when I had my private midwife, like I was explaining to you earlier, and she said that I would need to be on medication for the rest of my life, that it was a chemical imbalance, and you're just going to have to accept that you need medication, Andrea. That's just how it is. But I instinctively knew then, I hadn't even really gone into my journey that far. Instinctively, I knew that didn't feel true for me. That I felt like it was only ever going to be a tool to settle my mind so that I could get the control back, and then begin to, because I couldn't even meditate. Like, I'd gone on a 7-day silent retreat, which was meditation for 7 days straight before I had my daughter.
Yeah.
And then when I ended up with post-traumatic and postnatal, the thought of sitting and trying to meditate made me physically feel ill. Like I had lost all capability. My mind was so scrambled. And so, but once I started the medication and it settled, I was able to regain the trust in myself that I could take it from here. And I think in our busy lives and in our busy worlds, and then if you add trauma and different things in, we forget how to trust ourselves. We forget how to take the signs of the inner guidance that we all have.
Yeah, bring it inwards. That's what I always do. If I feel any sort of emotion, I need any sort of questions answering, I always bring it inwards, bring it back to me, bring it back to my breath, and then I'll find stillness, and then I'm able to move forward. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you.
You
so we will keep in contact, I'm sure.
Absolutely, that would be fabulous. I'd love that. And what a wonderful thing that you're doing by putting this out here for people to be able to support mental health, because it's so important that people, we normalize this, that this is just a part of who we are, and that's okay.
It is, isn't it? There's over 6 million people, I think the statistics are, in the UK that are suffering. We have a diagnosis of anxiety or depression. There's so many people that need help, and that we can reach out to. I think it's important. Mental health is an ongoing thing for me. It's an everyday thing, managing my own conditions. But I just wanted to use the opportunity of Mental Health Awareness Week to get some really good content out there for people, and raise that awareness, and break, like you say, break down the stigma.
Yeah, absolutely. So people can see themselves in us, because we're essentially all one, aren't we? Like, we might have different experiences and whatnot, but essentially, if somebody can see you and go, oh my gosh, she's had this or that's happened, and now she's doing this, that familiarity and that connection of it's not just me, because mental
Yeah.
health can be lonely, because it does feel like it is just you. That's what our brain wants us to think, that it is just us,
Yeah.
but it's
That's what
not.
our ego wants, isn't it? It wants to, isolate us and make us feel all these horrible feelings. Well, yeah.
Mm. We
Okay,
know better
thanks,
though, right?
Andrea.
Thanks.